All right, good morning, everyone. I should say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining from. It's 6 in the morning here in Wisconsin, in lovely Madison, Wisconsin. I'm just going to give people 1 or 2 more minutes to join in, get their coffee, and get seated for a wonderful trip through the state of Wisconsin and looking at clinical research nursing at UW-Madison. All right, so let's get started. I'm thinking that people will join as we're moving along, and that's wonderful. The more the merrier. I want to thank everyone for getting up early or staying up late or taking a break in your day to join us for international virtual visits. Right now, we are in Madison, and just to ground ourselves, today is Thursday, May 13th. I know sometimes with the pandemic, every day seems like the day before and the next day, but welcome. On behalf of the International Association of Clinical Research Nurses, I'm very excited to be sharing this presentation with you and look forward to the other presentations that are happening globally. I think it's a very exciting way to see how our CRN colleagues in other states, institutions, and countries practice. We know that we learn a great deal from each other, and I'm hoping through this presentation you will get a little glimpse into the world of clinical research nursing at UW-Madison, more specifically on the clinical research unit, because that's where I am employed. So what I do want to say is that the opinions expressed today are my own. They're not of my employer. I don't think that we're touching on anything sensitive, but I'm speaking on behalf of IACRN. So again, welcome. I wanted to first start out by telling you something that you all already know, that clinical research is complicated. It's complex. There are so many interweaving components, multidisciplinary collaborations, pieces to this puzzle. And I've seen over the last 3 years, more than I've ever seen, the clinical research nurse being at the nexus of everything related to clinical research. When we get a protocol on the CRU to operationalize, pharmacy has their piece, ancillary services have their piece, but it's the clinical research nurse who is at the center and kind of conducting the orchestra. We see where things are potentially going to fall apart. We identify those things, and hopefully we're able to mitigate some of those things before the participant is on our unit, is sitting in the chair ahead of us, in front of us. Before we do that blood draw, we know what we need to do. We've thought about all of those things. A friend of mine gave me a pair of socks that I thought were extremely appropriate for today. And it said, whatever it is, I can probably do it. And I think that when you take on the role of a clinical research nurse, you should get those socks, because whatever it is, you will probably be able to do it. You will certainly be able to figure it out. And I guarantee many people are relying on you to figure things out, whether or not they even recognize they're relying on you to figure it out. So a little bit about where we are, who we are. University of Wisconsin-Madison is located in Wisconsin. Wisconsin is in the United States. And I think, in my imagination, when people think of the United States, probably Wisconsin isn't the first place that they think about. Probably if you're outside of the Midwest, you really don't give Wisconsin too much of a thought, but it's my favorite state. It is in the Midwest. We have Lake Superior to our north and Lake Michigan to our east, to some of the Great Lakes. Very beautiful 4-season state. Here are some pictures from our state, and you can see it really kind of runs the gamut of what we experience. Right now in May, it's spring. Things are green, things are blooming. All of that beautiful snow that you see on some of the pictures ahead of you is melted. And I'm happy for that, because while I love winter, 5 months of winter gets a little bit tedious, and cabin fever starts to set in, especially during a pandemic. We have a lot of different sceneries, and the Capitol is kind of in the center there. If I look out one of the windows near my office coming in the morning, you can see the sun rising right behind the Capitol, and it's just absolutely beautiful. I put a picture of a red barn in there because I think Wisconsin is often associated with farming and agriculture. And we do have a lot of farms, a lot of agriculture, and that just seemed like kind of the perfect picturesque slide to put in there. So about Madison, Wisconsin, which is where UW Hospital, UW Health, the academic medical center that I work for and that we conduct research out of, is located. It's the state capital of Wisconsin and the home to the University of Madison, Wisconsin. About 586,000 people, so it's not a huge city. In 2010 to 2014, the growth rate is 5.8%, and it's increasing. We have a relatively low unemployment rate, and we are what I would consider a typical college town. It's really nice when the students leave in the summer, so you don't risk hitting them as they cross the streets, because despite the crosswalk or no crossing signs, pedestrians have the right of way, and the students in the city of Madison know that. So it's always a challenge going through campus. The University of Wisconsin Hospital, where I come to work every day, is located on the west end of campus. And you can see in the picture on the bottom, Madison is kind of on an isthmus. We have 3 lakes surrounding us. It's quite a beautiful city. So if you haven't considered visiting, I would suggest you do that. We go from the US to Wisconsin to Madison to UW Health, which is the institution that employs many of the clinical research nurses that I work with. It is an integrated health system of the University of Wisconsin, and we see more than 650,000 patients each year. We have 7 hospitals in the region. I work at University Hospital, which is the main hospital. About 1,700 physicians. There are 77 standalone clinics located around the state, and it is associated with a member health plan. So it's kind of like the insurance and UW Health are very closely connected. It's governed by UW Hospital and Clinics Authority, and it partners with the School of Medicine and Public Health related to patient care, research, education, community service, and missions. So there it just gives you an idea of the different hospitals and the regional hospitals. We have 2 hospitals that we are affiliated to the south of us in Illinois. And University Hospital is the main hospital. That is where the UW Clinical Research Unit, where I am the clinical nurse specialist, is located. We also work very closely with UW Carbone Cancer Center, and it's a comprehensive cancer center in Wisconsin designated by the NCI. Many of our trials are out of UW Carbone Cancer Center. I would say the makeup on the CRU is about 1/3 oncology, studies that we would have in affiliation with the Carbone Cancer Center. Maybe 1/3 are Alzheimer's disease treatment and prevention. And then the other 1/3 is really a variety of anything that a potential investigator would need nursing support in conducting, and they look to the CRU for nursing support to get that study up and running, operationalizing a protocol to patient participant care. UW Health, like every institution, has a mission and a vision. Advancing health without compromise through service, scholarship, science, social responsibility. Our vision is remarkable healthcare. And we all know that research is a part of healthcare. I've starred science here because I just like to show how the work that the CRNs are doing at UW Health, at the School of Medicine and Public Health, through the university, wherever we are really contributing to that science. So further breaking down science is translational research from bedside to the bench and from bench to bedside and the population. And I highlighted bedside because that's really where the CRN shines. We are the nurses, whether it's at the bedside or at a desk in a clinic or, seeing a participant out in the community. We are bringing the science that somebody is working on from the lab to the human being that it will hopefully one day benefit. I have a few recordings. Betsy Nugent is the Chief Clinical Research Officer at UW Health, and she is going to speak on a bigger level about the research enterprise at UW Health, not specific to clinical research nursing, but recognizing that clinical research nurses are a very big part of the clinical research enterprise at UW Health. One thing that I would like to note when she is speaking is she talks about clinical trials, but we need to keep in mind that at UW Health, clinical trials is research, and that may or may not be interventional. It may not be treatment. It may be observational. It may be preventative. It really runs the gamut of research. It may be quality of life. Research could simply be people filling out questionnaires and talking about their experience. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen, share a new screen, because I'm not awesome at this. And hopefully this is going to work.
To you about some of the transformation that's been going on in the past 18 months at UW in terms of our clinical trials. We're redefining UW clinical trials. In the past, clinical trials has really had 3 different entities that have operated in the clinical trial space. The new UW Clinical Trials Enterprise is bringing these 3 institutions together into a more collaborative and cohesive clinical trials program. UW-Madison is our main university campus, which includes our IRB, our compliance office, as well as our contracting entities. UW Health, as you learned, is where our clinical research unit resides, our clinical research nurses, as well as our patients and our clinical providers. And the School of Medicine and Public Health is where our faculty investigators are employed, as well as most of our clinical research professionals. Together, these 3 entities will be working to create a cohesive and comprehensive UW clinical trials program. The Academic Medical Center, which is the UW Health, has created a new strategic plan going forward. One of the 4 main pillars of that program is research, as you can see on the slide. And one of the strategic initiatives that they're taking on in the coming year is discovery and innovation. Their mission in discovery and innovation is to be the preferred and trusted partner to safely and equitably lead innovation and take it from discovery to the people we serve. We're excited to be part of the strategic initiative. Innovation and clinical research within our organization follows a continuum that crosses many different areas of the multiple institutions. The Isthmus Project is an innovation center at UW Health. It helps new inventors and innovators, as well as investigators, with determining diligence and market fit. They work on feedback sessions, assess clinical and business need, look at health system workflows, assess the technical viability of inventions and innovations, and also deal with intellectual property status. Once that's done, it can move into first use evaluation, where we do product evaluation and determine the metrics that will allow us to know whether or not a certain invention or innovation is successful. The soft handoff then goes to the Institute for Clinical and Translational Research, which is housed in the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. This area really focuses on research development, including protocol development, investigational new drug or investigational device exemption consultations, funding identification, in education of our investigators, as well as our clinical research professionals. The next soft handoff comes to the area that we call the UW Clinical Trials Office. This includes preparation for clinical trials, contracting and budgeting, sponsor relationships, regulatory submissions to both the FDA as well as the IRB, ancillary review by various departments that may be involved in the research, informed consent, document development, and billing compliance review. Once those things are completed, we move into an initiation phase, which includes planning for the initiation of our research study, having started meetings with our clinical partners where appropriate to ensure that we can have clinical workflow operationalization. Additionally, we work on technology, including our electronic medical record and our clinical trials management system, among other technologies. And we come up with recruitment plans about how we can best find patients and get the trials to them at the right point in time. Lastly, we operationalize our study, figure out how we're going to conduct it, assign our study teams, follow our first patient through to ensure that our processes are working well. We work with the Pharmaceutical Research Center at UW Health, as well as the Clinical Research Unit at UW Health, and then we provide monitoring should a study need it. So our work on clinical trials did span across the pandemic, and one of the things that was a challenge, as it was for everyone, were really the COVID-19 trials. UW had more than 80 COVID-19 clinical trials that were interventional that had to be evaluated for our patient population and its particular strategy within our work system. We had many more studies than those 80s that were in preclinical stages, either where bench researchers were working on them or models were being performed. We brought together a COVID-19 interventional trial committee that was interdisciplinary, that met every week to review the clinical trials for their fit in our system, for the resources we had available, and for their recruitment potential. We had to speed up the process, obviously, as everyone did for COVID-19. And so during this period, our average time from contract to first patient in was an average of 21 days, which is very, very fast. In fact, the global pandemic was announced on March 11th, and by March 24th, we had one of our first clinical trials open. All of our trials were managed centrally by the UW Clinical Research Office, but we did bring together multi-departmental work teams, including areas like pharmacy, the Clinical Research Center, the Clinical Research Office, and many of the departments, including Department of Medicine, Oncology, and asthma allergy, all working together to ensure that we could open these clinical trials in a way that made sense for both our clinical teams as well as our patients and research teams. Clinical trials were some of the only viable treatment options, and so it was really critical to UW to get these trials opened in a way that was expeditious and make them available to providers who may need them as options to treat patients. Additionally, we were focused on prevention, as was most of the world. And so we did open some vaccine trials for COVID, and these were coordinated centrally between teams. Vaccine trials are a different beast altogether, and our clinical research office worked diligently with clinical partners to ensure that we had space, We had workflows. We had ways to get vaccine from our pharmaceutical research center to the areas where patients were being vaccinated and were participating in the clinical trial. So again, a team effort to really get these COVID vaccine trials open. And then we really made inroads into patient-centric clinical trials. We realized that many of our patients with COVID were very, very ill, and we tried to create systems that allowed them to participate in research with minimal burden. At the same time, COVID-19 was going on, and we were doing all this work with COVID-19 clinical and prevention trials. We also had other clinical trials initiatives that were really important to our system. One that we had started just prior to the pandemic was starting to bring up an e-regulatory system. An e-regulatory system is important because it allows you to electronically route regulatory documents for signature, as well as making them available to providers and study staff across the organization. So even if a provider happened to be at a different facility where we were doing a clinical trial, they could still have access to the materials that they might need for regulatory. We're still in the process of implementing that system, and we hope our e-regulatory system will be fully operational by the end of the summer. We also needed to come up with remote monitoring systems at the same time when the world was switching to virtual visits. We needed a way for our sponsor monitors to continue to monitor patients without having to come on site. And so we brought up our remote monitoring systems in the past year to help sponsors monitor our important clinical trials. We are implementing an artificial intelligence system for recruiting, and that will help us to identify patients at the right time and send that information to providers who may need to make treatment decisions that include clinical trials for some of our patients. We've created clinical and research work streams with our clinical colleagues to make processes easier and more streamlined, and to build partnership between both the clinical and the research teams. We piloted an inpatient team that would specifically work with our hospitalists and our critical care teams. They did many of the COVID-19 studies and will continue on to bring more inpatient studies to our patients. We launched new training programs in 2021 for our clinical research professionals, and we continue to add on to that so that our clinical research professionals will have opportunities to continue to grow their skill sets and advance their career. Additionally, there's a new clinical research professional community of practice run entirely by clinical research professionals that really focuses on their needs, their opportunities for growth, and their education. We've created common systems across the organization so that every study team will be able to use the same systems and gain the benefit of the efficiencies of those systems. We started a clinical trials media campaign, both externally as well as outreach in our community and internal communication to both our providers as well as our partners throughout the university, including the School of Medicine and Public Health. And then we're starting to move forward on our ACRS accreditation. ACRS is a new accreditation that has standards for clinical trials, and UW is an early adopter of these standards, and we will be working on that going forward. So some of the areas that we're really focusing right now on include operations. So we're really working on minimizing barriers. We know that clinical trials are getting more and more complex. And so really optimizing our workflows to ensure that we are not doing unnecessary or redundant work is critical to our sustainability going forward. We're also working on common systems. The work of clinical trials is increasingly complex, and since we have brought 3 entities together, our complexity is tripled, sadly. So by implementing common data and operational systems, we allow for transparent and easier pathways for our work to be completed. And by bringing clinical trials directly to clinicians and patients at the right time in the care continuum, this can really be a challenge. And so we're trying to use next generation technology solutions that will increase our recruitment and reduce the burden on our providers of finding an appropriate clinical trial for their patient at the right time. Ultimately, these things are going to come together to reduce the cost of clinical trials and make our organization more sustainable and more profitable. The next area of focus for us is really quality. So we're building a specialized clinical trials quality team. This team will work with research teams to implement continuous quality improvement cycles. Even maintaining the normal work requires improvement. And so by changing our culture to one of prevention instead of a culture of remediation is going to be the key to our success. We want the right thing to do to always be the easy thing to do. We're going to work on evaluating changes that we make to make sure that they truly are improving our system and that we aren't creating other problems by changing or making different workflows. And we're going to work in partnership with the Maine University, the School of Medicine, and UW Health to ensure that we have quality processes throughout the organization. The next important area is always going to be infrastructure. We talked a little bit about new technologies that we're implementing in our organization, and we're constantly looking for new ways to implement technology to make our work more efficient and better. We are working on our workflows in the facilities, figuring out how we can optimize the space that we have and use it best for our clinical research. We're also coming up with common procedures that will help guide our work and make us as efficient as we can be. And we're working with our partners in ancillary services, including areas like nursing and pharmacy and lab and imaging and scheduling, all the different areas in our health system that we really need to integrate with so that we can ensure that we're providing patient-centric care, even in clinical research. And then last, but of course not least, are our personnel. Our success or failure in clinical trials rests with the talent of our research professionals. We really need to empower them to make decisions about their work to improve it every day. They're the ones doing the work, and so they're the best informed to make changes and make suggestions about how we can do things better. We really want to engage our research workforce in our success by providing them regular communication and gaining their feedback about what's going well and what isn't, so that we can make the appropriate changes to continue to move us forward. We want them to take ownership of improvements that they are suggesting and hope that they will continue to strive to make their work the best that it can be for them, as well as fulfilling for them personally. And we're hoping that by allowing our personnel to do more of the suggesting of improvements, we'll be able to quickly adapt when we have trials that have new challenges or need to be handled differently. We feel like our personnel are in the best place and best location to really make suggestions to us about how we improve our work. Thank you for allowing us the time to really talk about clinical trials at UW, and have a wonderful and very happy International Clinical Trials Day. Thank you.
So I hope that you are all back to seeing my PowerPoint slides. The next area that we're going into is clinical research, nursing, and the specialty of that practice. So there were several things in Betsy's talk that really struck me. One of them was when she was just speaking at the end about personnel and the empowerment, the engagement, the ownership, and the adaptability. That is in how we want our research professionals to embrace those ideas. As clinical research nurses, I feel that IACRN very much supports all of those things for clinical research nurses. And the way that it supports clinical research nurses and ultimately the clinical trials, the clinical research that we are a part of, is by creating a place to share best practices. One of the first things that this organization did was to define the specialty practice of clinical research nursing. If you still today would ask people, what is a clinical research nurse, you will get many different answers. I think having a definition, the specialized practice of professional nursing focused on maintaining equilibrium between the care of the research participant and fidelity to the research protocol. This specialty practice incorporates human subjects protection, care coordination and continuity, contribution to clinical science, clinical practice, and the management through a variety of professional roles, practices, and settings and clinical specialties really sums up what CRNs do, because our roles are so vast, they're so varied. We have so many different roles and responsibilities. Now that we have a definition for this, it kind of allows us to catapult into why are we so important? And we all know why we're so important. Unfortunately, we sometimes have a hard time articulating that. Another thing in Betsy's talk that really struck me was her mention of culture and moving from a culture of prevention to remediation. And as clinical research nurses, that's what we do. We plan and we prepare so that on the day of the visit, when we're in the OR or when we're drawing 14 vials of tubes for blood tubes, we know that they're the right tubes because we've planned for this. And we're going to work to prevent any deviations or compromise in participant safety so that we don't have to remediate that on the back end. And I think that's what the clinical research nurse is so excellent at doing. So before I move into just talking a little bit about IACRN, I would just like to know if anybody has any questions or comments. You can unmute yourself. You could put it in the chat. I really would love this to be as interactive as possible. So I'm going to just pause for a few seconds here to see if anybody has any comments or thoughts. And if not, we'll move on.
Tam,
Yes.
it's Jen. It's a wonderful, wonderful session. Thank you so much for organizing all this. I want to move.
Very excited.
Good. It shows. I want to move to Madison, please. I don't know why
in
anyone would.
In the summer.
I don't know why anyone wouldn't want to be there. Betsy Nugent had some really great quotes. I think I'm really impressed by her, and thank you for getting her to record that. I have a question just before we go into the IACRN and certification piece about the clinical research professionals that she mentioned and the work you're doing. Are they colleagues who don't have, I assume they aren't nursing colleagues or other registered professionals or licensed
Correct.
professionals, is that
Correct.
right? And you're calling
yes.
them CRPs, clinical research professionals?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And would that encompass all levels, that they might be sort of very junior? Do you have them at different levels within the team, or are they all sort of work underneath the registered nurses? Or
well, actually, some study groups don't have an affiliated nurse working in their group. They work under the designation of their PI.
okay.
Some groups do have nurses. I think that for instance, the Carbone Cancer Center, they are moving to they have different pods depending on disease specificity, and they are moving to having more nurses because I believe that they have started to see the value of the clinical research nurse in the oncology world. But there are many more unlicensed personnel than clinical research nurses working in our institution.
We're seeing a big shift, and we're just launching a scheme for CRPs, clinical research practitioners. And it would be very interesting to understand how you support yours and train and educate them and how that all works at some point. So thank you
It's
so
very
much.
new.
Yeah,
Our
ours too.
collaborative training is very new because up until now it's been left up to the individual investigator, and we've just seen that that's not.
Yeah.
There's more remediation than prevention.
Yeah, that's great. Us too. Thanks so much.
Yes. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next part of my talk. Don't hesitate to put anything in the chat either. So on one of Betsy's slides, she had 5 boxes about all of the workup of the research. There was another section where she talked about the initiatives that they're undergoing, whether that's artificial intelligence or electronic whatever, consent signing, document signing. And while our little bubble of the CRU might not be directly involved in some of those initiatives, it all kind of filters down to us. Because with the initiation of e-consent, now on the unit, that's what we're seeing, and that's how we're checking consent forms instead of having an actual paper copy or something scanned into the medical record. So this collaborative approach is extremely important because even if we're thinking that initiatives and goals and new processes aren't going to impact other areas that we work within, they will at some point. And that preparation for that and understanding what is e-consent, what do I need to look for in the medical record is very important. And that's one of the reasons that I love IACRN is because there are colleagues in this organization who have been dealing with e-consent for 15 years, or maybe not 15. And I go to them and I say, how do you handle this? There is a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge, best practices, current practices of how people do things. We have a webinar coming up in June. Carla, who's on this call, and we'll hear from her later. We're going to work with 2 other organizations to talk about a very practical CRN issue, which is how do you prime the line of your research medications? And what is best practice? So it's wonderful to reach out to our colleagues who have their own SOPs and they say, this is how we do it. And we learn from each other. Professional nursing organizations like IACRN focus on specialty practices. In our case, the specialty practice of clinical research nursing. And while we have other professional organizations for research, IACRN was the first professional nursing organization. It's got a lot of opportunities out there. If you haven't looked into them, please do. Please tell your friends. Networking alone is wonderful. Elise and I email multiple times a week. She's in South Africa. I love to hear about what's happening there and share with what we're doing here. The perspective, not only within the United States in how NIH might handle something, or Diane in the Rocky Mountain chapter might handle something, but the global perspective is very, very fascinating, very informative, because we're all dealing with the same problems. We're just approaching them potentially in different ways. So it's a wonderful learning experience from other clinical research experts. And we're able to share current and best practices. My hope is one day that we can take some of these current practices and make them the best practices, because right now we are blazing the trail of clinical research and procedures and processes related to clinical research, how you prime your medication bags, how you draw your PK samples. Those are things that hospitals don't have policies or procedures for. In our hospital, we don't draw serial blood draws off of an IV. Well, in clinical research, we do. So how do we identify those gaps and then come up with best practices in the realm of clinical research? That's something that I'm very excited to continue to work on so that new CRNs not only get a pair of socks that say they can probably do anything, they also have guides as to how things should be done. And that's one very exciting upcoming event, is the publication of the core curriculum, so that all of us who have been in this role for many years and who had to figure things out on our own, we will have a guide. We will have evidence-based practice to best processes, best practices for clinical research nurses. And then the support and the professional development that comes out of IACRN has been very valuable to me. We, as many of you know, kicked off certification with our first cohort in April of 2021. That is something that members very much indicated that they wanted from, my guess is, day one. It was a long road, but we're here and we're able to show our proficiency to the profession, show our professional development and our expertise. So the vision and mission for IACRN is to enhance clinical research quality and safety through specialized nursing practice. And we know that the role of the CRN is vast. You could work in industry, you can work in regulatory, you may be at the bedside. The mission is a professional organization whose purpose is to define, validate, and advance clinical research nursing as a specialty practice, and to support the professional development of registered nurses who directly or indirectly impact the care of clinical research participants across the clinical specialties. I think the directly or indirectly impact is something that people outside of clinical research don't understand. For instance, at our organization, we're very driven by numbers. We're very driven by census. And so if you look at our census on the clinical research unit, the people who put the numbers into the algorithm might say, oh, you need 3 nurses. And what they don't understand is this indirectly impact care is a whole separate body that we need to address. The protocols don't come to us ready to be operationalized on the unit. There is an enormous amount of work that goes into that. And that's another thing that I think this group working together can find a way to articulate to those who just don't understand what it takes to get a protocol up and running, what it takes to make sure that regulatory parameters are being met, that patients are being kept safe, that drugs haven't expired, that they've arrived to your institution with the temperature appropriate and documented. Other areas in nursing don't have to worry about that like the clinical research nurse does. And the organization has been a wonderful way to share and learn about this profession for me. I do want to thank UW Health, the Institute for Clinical and Translational Research, and the Institute and School of Medicine and Public Health. They were sponsors for the 2020 conference, and that leads into 2021, the entire year. And this really is important to me because it shows that they do support the clinical research nurses at their institution, and they support IACRN, who further supports the clinical research nurses. So that is very important. And I just wanted to say thank you to my organization for that sponsorship. So now I am excited to talk a little bit about the clinical research unit at University Hospital. We are a dedicated unit within the hospital. We're on the 6th floor, D66. We have a nurse manager, Tammy Kiger, I am the clinical nurse specialist. We work very closely together to, I keep saying operationalize the protocol in the clinical setting, and that's what it is. It seems like one sentence with just a few words, but it's huge. We all know that. We have a care team leader or a charge nurse on any given day, and then 2 clinical program coordinators who are dedicated to working up, implementing those research protocols. If there's a patient that needs to be seen in interventional radiology for part of their study, they're working on how are we going to make this work. We have, when fully staffed, 15 bedside RNs, and we don't work with any nursing assistants or medical assistants. We have a health unit coordinator who helps with scheduling. But really, other than that, we are an all RN unit. We do have a research lab manager who works in our dedicated research lab. When she's not here, the CRN picks up the lab role. When the HUC isn't here, the CRN picks up the lab role. We are truly the jack of all trades, and the master of many also. We have a bionutritionist on staff, so when we have nutritional or endocrine studies, she's available. There are a lot of oncology studies where drugs have to be taken with a meal of a certain % of fat or carbohydrates, so then we call her in to help out. Luckily, this was quite a diamond in the rough. She has a history, before she became a dietitian, she worked in the lab. So sometimes we ask her to work in the lab, and that has really been extremely helpful, because as those initiatives that Betsy was talking about come to fruition, we become more busy. So everybody's working on making things better, and people want to bring their research to UW-Madison, and some of that comes to the clinical research unit. So we're growing, and I'm very excited to be a part of that. We also have a protocol manager who does much of the administrative work behind protocols coming to the CRU, and a protocol facilitator who is a non-RN who works on protocol implementation. And we say protocol implementation, but we all know that just because you see your first study participant doesn't mean that the work stops, because there's always bumps in the road. A little bit more about the unit. You see a picture here. It's a standard room. It's a hospital room like any other hospital room within our hospital. We have 14 private rooms. You know, there's a bed, there's a nice little chair. A visitor, if it's not COVID time, can sit and visit. They have a TV and a private bathroom. And we put patients there who are here for a longer amount of time, for a 10-hour day, overnight, obviously. And we also have a treatment room that is just a big room, 6 treatment chairs. And when we run high volume kinds of studies where people aren't going to be here for a very long time, we really use that room. We have a research specimen processing lab where we do research processing, nothing diagnostic. That would go to our lab, which is in-house as well. We have a unit kitchen because we have a lot of studies that require participants to be fasting before a blood draw. So we like to give them a little bagel or juice or something after their blood draw. And then we have a dedicated pharmacy. We work with several pharmacies, which is another thing that a nurse on a standard unit or in a clinic would never have to deal with, as we have a research pharmacy. We have an inpatient pharmacy and an outpatient pharmacy. While we're an inpatient unit, really 95% of our studies are outpatient. There's just been a very big turn over the years of funding for trials. And if people don't have to be in the hospital, we're not going to have them be in the hospital. We are staffed fully 24/7, except 2 weekends a month. We do not have overnight staff. And even though we might not have a patient or a participant overnight, there are many things that those PM, and night nurses do to keep our unit operational, to keep our unit running so that we can prevent instead of mitigate, so that at 7 a.m. when our participants show up, the nurses who are caring for the participants are ready to hit the ground because they know their colleagues overnight have set them up for success. It's such a team approach. It's something that we hear often, but to see it in action is really, it's wonderful. It's one of my very favorite things about working on this unit. We have about 100 active studies at any one time and about 50 in the workup stage. And the way that it works is when a study team or investigator recognizes that they need nursing support, they submit a consult to the clinical research unit. We do a fairly brief feasibility of the study, and for the most part, we can tell pretty quickly, is this something we can carry out on the clinical research unit or not? We're designated as a medical unit. So if it's something that would need IMC or higher level of care, we're not going to be able to carry it out here. And it also has to do with the patient population and how much nursing clinical care they might need, because we're staff for research. And that's another thing that's sometimes difficult to articulate to people, is that our focus is getting that blood draw at 10:32. And while on another unit, 10:32 or 11:20 might not make a difference, it does here. And it makes a difference for the end product as well. And our researchers are very grateful that we're collecting the data so accurately. We have a combination of inpatient and outpatient stays, but like I said, a majority are outpatient. And we have a variety of disciplines. If they need nursing support, we most likely will take on the trial. We don't do pediatrics under the age of 12, unless it's a special exception or something that we would be equipped to do. We do have a vaccination study that will be seeing participants 12 and above. We see interventional and observational studies, and visits range from a simple blood draw and set of vital signs to multiple IV infusions over a 10-hour day. We say kind of our policy on the CRU is that if a visit is going to last more than 10 hours, we want that participant to be inpatient. That's a long day for the participant. We don't want to be kicking them out at 11 o'clock at night after a very long day of blood draws and research medications. And so that is one of the things that kind of our cutoff time for inpatient versus outpatient studies. So like I said before, if you break it down to what we do on the CRU, we operationalize protocols and we carry out specific nursing interventions and activities. And it sounds so easy, but it's not. And we all know that. So now I'd like to show you the faces of the CRNs at UW Health through a couple of videos. I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed that I'm able to share this content. And then once we're done sharing these videos, I would like to open it up for some conversation. I do see that Diane is on the call. She and the Rocky Mountain Group are taking over this presentation in an hour. So we still have an hour together. But let's look at the faces of the CRNs at UW.
Williams, one of the 7 founders of IACRN. I began my career in clinical research as a cardiology research coordinator in 1988, and later at a different hospital, led clinical research feasibility reviews and served on the IRB. Prior to my retirement in 2019, for 16 years, I was a nurse manager of Williams, one of the 7 founders of IACRN. I began my career in clinical research as a cardiology research coordinator in 1988, and later at a different hospital, led clinical research feasibility reviews and served on the IRB. Prior to my retirement in 2019, for 16 years, I was a nurse manager of the clinical research unit at the University of Wisconsin Hospital. As a CRN, I found that the International Association of Clinical Research Nurses, IACRN, to be an endless resource and support for advancement of a CRN specialty and an opportunity to learn from other CRNs globally. So how did this organization come to be and why is it important to you and I? Well, here's the story. In 2003, when I joined the University Hospital in Wisconsin as a nurse manager, the research unit was funded by the National Institute of Health under the program of General Clinical Research Centers, referred to as GCRCs. At the time, there were approximately 80 centers across the United States. Nurse managers were integral to the operation of the GCRCs, and there was a strong GCRC nurse manager organization. That organization had developed orientation for nurse manager roles, conducted educational programs, and developed research SOPs. The group provided a strong support system for nurse managers across the U.S. However, in 2006, the NIH began to transition to the CTSA programs that had a broader focus than the clinical unit, and the support through the NIH grant for nurse manager organization was no longer available. Many of us who had benefited from the education and networking with other nurse managers were concerned that the knowledge and resources that had been gained would be lost now if there was no longer a mechanism to connect us with other nurses to share experiences and knowledge. Therefore, in 2009, a group of 7 of the GCRC nurse managers met to form the IACRN. Although the original GCRC organization consisted of only nurse managers of research units, we believed it important to include all nurses working in any research capacity, no matter the role or the setting. Additionally, we believed it important to include CRNs globally, not just those in the U.S. Through this new IACRN organization, we've been able to not only share information and provide educational opportunities through conferences and webinars, but also define our practice with the publication of the scope and standards of practice that includes competencies for the CRN. Additionally, the organization has been a conduit to connect CRNs globally and to share best practices with each other. A recognition of the clinical research nurses as a specialty by the American Nurses Association has contributed greatly to the credibility of this valuable role in the U.S. And the publication of the scope and standards provides not only a definition and description of the practice, but in addition, it establishes CRN practice guidelines for the first time, not only for CRNs, but also for other professionals working in the clinical research area to better understand the knowledge and the value CRNs contribute. However, for IACRN organization to be successful, be sustained, and continue to grow, it requires the dedication of CRN volunteers to serve on committees and provide leadership. There are many opportunities of varying time commitments within the organization. And additionally, IACRN has established a leadership program for those who wish to become more engaged in the organization, would like additional mentoring. So I hope that you will consider joining IACRN if you've not done so already, and to take advantage of these many educational opportunities and networking opportunities. If you're not a member, if you are a member rather, I hope that you will join a committee. It's a great way to connect with other CRMs and contribute to the profession.
Hi, I'm Sarah Rush, a nurse and clinical program coordinator at University Hospital in Madison, Wisconsin. I have been a CRN for 7 years. Depending on the day, I might be a staff nurse, a charge nurse, processing samples in the research lab, or working on protocol implementation, figuring out how to operationalize new studies. I became a CRN because I truly love research. I helped conduct research as a student. I worked in a pathology lab before getting my nursing degree. So when I found out I could be a nurse on a research unit, I felt like it was my professional path and my calling. Challenges in my role. Doing research is hard, very resource intensive. detail-oriented, requires a lot of workflow development and interdisciplinary collaboration to get it right. The CRN is at the nexus of all of the disciplines, ideally suited to facilitate communication and identify workflows while always advocating for patient-centered care. What is rewarding to me is seeing the research in action, seeing all of the hard work get put into motion, helping a patient get access to a novel treatment that would not otherwise be available, or perhaps figuring out basic science breakthroughs for a disease process that might lead to a brighter future. Being a CRN means being a part of changing the status quo, improving the standard of care, changing the face of medicine, and saving lives. We are practicing at the cutting edge of science and medicine. We are a part of something much larger than ourselves. Remembering that is incredibly important to me.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Bianca White. I am currently a clinical research nurse working on D66 at the University of Madison, Wisconsin Hospital. I currently have been on the unit for about 6 months since last November. And initially when I wanted to get started here, I was working in the Children's Hospital just across the hospital from where I'm at right now. And I was just looking for kind of a change of, I guess, pace and a little bit more of a challenge in a intellectual way, I think. Not so much critical thinking as far as interpreting, disease processes and all that stuff, but looking to kind of just make a more of a long lasting difference. I think a lot of times as a nurse, you feel that you're not making a difference. You make a difference while they're in the hospital, but not when they go home per se. And I think that's kind of what I enjoy about here. So I get to work with a lot of different types of patients. We do a lot of different studies, such as Alzheimer's studies. We were a part of the AstraZeneca vaccine trial. We do many, many oncology studies, which I really enjoy because we get to see patients here frequently. So we really get to know them. And that's something that I really enjoy. So when I started here, I didn't know exactly what I would be doing, but we're kind of the wearer of all hats. So I get to see patients. I also have the opportunity, we hang meds, we're chemotherapy certified through the hospital. We also, here at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, we get to process our labs sometimes, which is a change of pace, but it's definitely fun. And also, like I said, we are very much involved in their care. I think the most difficult part is not being so involved with, again, their care outside of here. So I don't so much get a say as much as I would, or being able to connect them to the correct resources. A lot of it falls on the study team, but we definitely do our best to be sure that they have all of the resources that they need when they leave here to set them up to be the most successful. And I think that is also one of the most rewarding parts, is that we really get to be a fierce advocate for our patients. So a lot of times, we have a registered dietitian here that we get to refer them to, or, we can make the connections if they're needing a psychology kind of consult, if they're really struggling with their diagnosis, or if they need some kind of help out of here, we do our best to be able to do that. But I think the most important thing to me, and the thing that is kind of the deal maker, I guess I should say, is that I really enjoy the fact that we are able to make a long lasting difference. And it may not feel like it at the time. Different patients respond differently to certain treatments, and different cancers respond differently to certain, drugs or chemotherapies. But to find new uses for these previously approved chemotherapies, or to find a way to make that long lasting difference, and the patients understand kind of the gravity of it too, not only for their own survival, but I think also for the survival of others down the road. It's a very humbling position. You see how many people are actually able to see the gravity of what they're doing. I think about it with the AstraZeneca vaccine trial. I think that was huge, that people were willing to be the pioneers, as we would say, be the pioneers for one of the COVID vaccine trials, and, people wanting to make a difference. So I think that is one of the most rewarding things about this. And I think, again, that's super important. So that's about all I have. So thank you so much.
All right. Are you guys able to hear me again?
Yes.
Unfortunately, Kendra, I'm sorry. I couldn't play that video, and I couldn't play one of them from Bridget Johnson either. Those were two more that I had on cue. Luckily, I have some people here who are live. And so Kendra, just chat me if you are okay to do this live. I'm putting you on the spot, I know. But one of the things that I wanted to share with you guys before we go on to Kendra, if she's willing to do it live, and then Carla and Tammy, is when Mary Jane was speaking, I have to give her credit / blame for my involvement in IACRN when she was working with the others to get this organization up and running. I was kind of at a point in my life, I had 3 young kids, you know, I wasn't paying much attention, quite honestly, to professional development. And she really engaged me, and she really showed me the importance of being a clinical research nurse instead of just a nurse working on a clinical research unit. And I really ended up embracing that. And I thank her for that, for kind of pushing me outside of my comfort zone. And I like to hear her talk about kind of how it all started, because I think it's really interesting that, again, clinical research nurses see the need, they see where there's a gap, where there's a deficiency, and they do something about it. When Bianca was talking, she made a comment in her presentation about how the participants, you know, they're extremely altruistic, they're contributing to the bigger picture. And she caught me later in the day and said she was working with a patient, an oncology patient, and he made that exact comment that, you know what, I know that this might not work for me, but hopefully it works for somebody else in the future. And I think that just, you know, just really sealed it for her that this does make a difference. And she's new. She's only been here for 6 years, or not 6 years, sorry, 6 months. And she's grasping that already. So I love to hear these stories. Kendra, thank you. I'm happy to have you speak. I think I'm going to let you go first. So whenever you are ready, Kendra, go ahead and unmute and take it away.
Sure. Hi. So I'm Kendra Haight. I've been a research nurse for almost 10 years in the Madison area. I've been working at UW-Madison, which is affiliated with, but as Tam had mentioned, not the exact same as UW Health. I've been there for about 4 years, specifically in infectious disease research, and I'm a nurse coordinator, so I do a lot of, you know, essentially from protocol proposals through study closeout. And I actually first became interested in clinical research. The first I heard of it was when I was in middle school, when my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer for the first time. And she actually ended up on a clinical trial for Herceptin. So this was the trial where it was either you got Herceptin or placebo along with standard of care. And now obviously it's a very widely used drug. And this trial actually was stopped early because it was, you know, considered effective enough that it was considered unethical to essentially give anybody placebo. So for me, research is really personal because I feel that it may very well have saved my mom's life and given me, you know, an extra 20 years with her. So when I went to nursing school here in Madison, I always knew I was interested in research, and actually somehow I didn't realize that the clinical research unit at UW did nurse residency programs. So I ended up at a local, essentially industry facility for about 5 years doing phase 1 research on healthy people. And then I've been at Madison for the last 4 years. And one thing I just find so rewarding is I feel like, I mean, patients don't have to do research. It's completely optional for them. And I really enjoy working with people who often don't expect to get any benefit from their participation in the trial, but really are just doing it so they don't have to, because their goal is to have it so nobody else has to experience what they went through. And I know that was true for my mom as well. You know, she was like, I have 3 daughters, I have breast cancer. I really want to advance medicine to make the world better for them should they get it. And I worked specifically in infectious disease research, which I think is especially rewarding because it's something, anybody can catch. So it's a very diverse patient population because, again, anybody can get an infectious disease. I mean, we do tend to see patients who are more susceptible to infection. So I do have, a high number of oncology or solid organ transplant patients. But just the, range of patients we can see is really enjoyable to work with. As far as challenges, for me being in the coordinator role, working directly for a PI, I would say one of our biggest challenges is recruitment, because essentially if you don't have enough patients to have good data, the study just isn't going to be as worthwhile. So just having the patient population and trying to convince people to do studies, since it's not something they have to do, is one of the biggest challenges in my role. I know it's been talked about, but just the time it takes to get protocols running is also involved with that. But I'm really looking forward to the initiatives at UW that hopefully make that, faster. So in terms of why, what I'm doing is important to me, again, I think just advancing medicine is incredibly important. And I feel very fortunate to be in a field where I'm able to do so.
Thank you so much, Kendra, for speaking on the spot. I just love hearing everyone's story. And just to be clear, we haven't always had a nurse residency program. So we might not have had it when you were in school. It is fairly new. And so that's another thing that we have talked, I've talked with my IACRN colleagues about, is how do you onboard new staff, experienced, and do you have a nurse residency program or some sort of orientation program for nurses right out of school? Because I think this is really a nursing specialty that is not known about. And IACRN is doing work. They have done work. A PowerPoint slide that can be taken to schools of nursing. And that would be great if all of our members could contact their local schools of nursing, get in, do a session on the specialty of clinical research nursing practice, so that this isn't something that we stumble upon. So anyway, Kendra, thank you. Carla, I'm going to have you up next to speak. Okay, Carla, take it away.
Yeah, I love to speak. Hi, I'm Carla Croft. I am one of 2 clinical research program specialists for UW Health. That's a really fancy term, which isn't very descriptive. So what I actually do is provide support within our electronic health record. We use Epic to our research users. The vast majority of them are research coordinators. This involves everything from study-specific initiatives, things like recruitment tools or an order set in order to operationalize a research study in a particular nursing area within our organization. And it also involves larger initiatives like implementing research functionality throughout the electronic health record. This involves things like clinical research billing initiatives, providing security templates for all of the different research roles we have in our organization, making research easily accessible and well documented within the electronic health record. So I have been IACRN for 10 years now. I had to do the math in my head. I started on the clinical research unit with TAM, and I ended up there by accident. I say accident, it's not entirely accidental. I applied for the nurse residency program there, and at the time you ranked which units you were interested in. I ranked research relatively high, not my number 1, but I ended up very luckily getting a job there. I have never regretted getting hired at the clinical research unit. It was an amazing unit to work for. I loved it a lot. About a year and a half ago, I transitioned to this role, which is more providing support to organization level rather than a unit level. I find this really rewarding. I really love my job. Obviously, there are challenges, but I think it is really kind of fun and interesting to help implement some of these larger initiatives, which we heard Betsy talking about earlier within the electronic health record. I really enjoy working with study teams one-on-one and helping them get their studies up and going. I think some of the challenges I face, or a lot of the challenges I face, are related to the fact that, as Betsy spoke about in the video earlier, that we are 3 separate entities trying to work together under this common goal. Our research coordinators are employed by the university. Most of our clinical staff are employed by UW Health, the academic medical facility. And so trying to get everybody to the table, all of the right participants, to make these policy decisions or workflow decisions, and trying to make sure that all of the workflows work for everybody, not just the research staff, not just the clinical staff, but everybody, and kind of everything is coming together in order to provide the best experience for the patient, both in terms, as always, as a clinical research nurse, of the protocol compliance and adherence, and also patient safety. That is the biggest challenge, just getting everyone to the table who needs to be, and making all of those conversations and decisions happen. So why I'm doing what I'm doing, why is that important to me? I think that everyone else has really spoken to that already, and I feel the same, that clinical trials, clinical research is a really important field and an important specialty. Everything we do as healthcare professionals is built off of research, or it should be if it's not. And so just being able to support that throughout our organization is really valuable, both to me as a person and as a professional, and within our organization. And it's really exciting to see our organization moving in a direction where they're prioritizing clinical research and clinical trials, and just seeing the value that that brings to a healthcare organization. So, yeah.
Thanks, Carla. I want to tell a little, it's not a funny story about Carla, but it's endearing.
Should I be worried?
You just a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. So when Carla was a nurse resident during the nurse residency program, and so that's a program that UW Hospital puts in place for new graduates. They come and they do maybe a little bit longer orientation on a unit, but they also have residency classes. They have to do a project, and Carla,
I know what you're going to say now.
One of the policies that we had in place was for flushing our peripheral IVs, and we flushed them with heparinized saline. And Carla said, well, why are we doing this? And at the time, the answer was kind of like, well, what do you mean? That's what we do. And so Carla did a literature search. She was quite persistent in coming to unit council, bringing this information to staff to say, there's nothing in the literature that says, for a peripheral IV, we should be flushing with heparin. It can just be normal saline. And I'm not sure that it took the first time, Carla. I think this had to come back a couple of times, because we had a few nurses who—
I was going to say there were, yes.
But Carla was persistent, and our policy ended up changing. And like she said, we need to be doing things based on science, and that's what we did. And I think that just really shows that while we might not have been her number one choice for her nurse residency placement, she is
was the right fit. This was the right place.
Sometimes your path is chosen for you, and that's okay. All right, Tammy, you are up next. I will turn it over to you whenever you are ready. Go ahead and unmute and take it away.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. So my name is Tammy Kiger. I am the current nurse manager for our clinical research unit. And I have been the nurse manager for just under 2 years, but this year marks my 20th anniversary as a clinical research nurse. I just realized that in drafting my little notes for this talk. And I have to say, Tam, this is fantastic. You are doing a great job. This is great information, and it's really cool to see all these personal stories. So thank you for pulling this together. So I started my career in clinical research on the clinical research unit here at UW Health in 2001 as a bedside CRN. And I worked here for 10 years as a bedside nurse. And I loved my job. I thought I would retire here. Tamara was my preceptor. It was just the absolute best. What I liked most was the variety, because as she spoke to much earlier in the presentation, the patient populations that we see on this unit, I mean, you do see healthy volunteers, but you know, you see hematology, oncology, Alzheimer's, prevention studies, you see infectious disease and, you know, nuke med, cardiology, sleep studies, like it's all over the place. And it's just so exciting. Every day I came to work was a different mix. I never knew what I mean, okay, you knew what you were going to see because you could look at the schedule, but every day was a different mix of, you know, what type of patients you were going to work with, what type of study you were going to be working on. And the people you're interacting with on the clinical and the research side was different every day. You know, our neighboring our neighboring clinical units in the hospital, we're the only research unit, but you know, they all have their specialty or their specific practice area, and they're working with consistent physicians and staff. And yes, the residents change over every, I don't know, 6 months to a year, but I mean, every day we're working with a different team of people. But it does keep it fresh and exciting. I tend to be a very detail-oriented person, and so I very much liked the intensity of some of the studies that we saw here. My most favorite was obtaining samples like every 2.5 minutes and adjusting a glucose rate for this insulin clamp. And, you know, you just have to be so precise and on top of it. And it was just exciting. And two, and I think someone else said this when they spoke, it's also just great to work with this patient population, patient participants. They want to be here. They're voluntary, right? They want to be part of something bigger. For some of them, it's, you know, maybe their last hope, like in some of the oncology studies, which is really sad, but it's great to be able to offer that ray of hope for them. And for others, just being on the cutting edge. So it's just been a very rewarding career. During the last few years, when I was on the CRU, our healthcare organization implemented Epic systems for our electronic health record, or EHR. And Mary Jane Williams, who spoke earlier, she was a nurse manager at the time and had the foresight to make sure that we had someone at the table representing research and the clinical research nurse and CRU, you know, at the table during even the early planning stages of implementing the EHR for our healthcare system, which was super exciting to be part of, though I will admit it took me a while to figure out why I was there. Big project. But, you know, my role slowly evolved from there. I became the super user for our unit, you know, got to work very closely with the IT side of here's what we need to support the research workflows on the CRU. Oh, wait a minute. What about like taking a step back? And we have all these researchers at the institution and these clinical research coordinators who aren't employees of UW Health, but they need representation too. And what about their workflows and their access? And for some of these, you know, leaders of the project and implementing the EHR, it was like this light bulb. It's like, wait, what? We have research here? And I think that's, you know, gotten better over time, certainly, especially having Betsy on board. Her position as the Chief Clinical Research Officer is new for our organization, but it's really helped shine a light on the fact that we do research here. We do a lot of research here, and we need to do more to enculturate our staff. So anyways, I really liked that position as a super user for the unit and being the expert in the EHR, but also having that, you know, significant research and nursing background under my belt. And so I really took an interest in the informatics side of things and ended up going back to school, got my master's, and ended up moving into the Department of Nursing Informatics. But I had a pseudo dual report with our director of clinical research at the time for both the school and the hospital. And so all of my projects, or most all of my projects, focused on research. and more at the organization level, which is actually the position Carla's in now, though it's kind of morphed over time. But it was very exciting. And in my role, I was unique in my position because I was the only one that was the voice of research when it came to IT. And so it was helpful that I spoke all three languages, right? I have this nursing background, I have a research background, and now I've gone through this informatics training. And so now I can kind of help be that liaison between those three worlds and bridge that gap. So really my focus again continued to be in research. I didn't realize till I did the math, but I did this for 8 years. And really it was supporting investigators and their teams in using the electronic health record. My role was often, though this wasn't, a defined responsibility, it just became evident that as a clinical research nurse, I really needed to use my expertise to help bridge the clinical and the research worlds. They're asking for, the researcher may be asking for some kind of EHR bill to support their study, not recognizing what it will take to implement that on the clinical side, be it an order set or other type of functionality. And so I really did have to bring the teams together and make sure nursing was at the table, that the study team was at the table, and really just talk through the workflows of how we're going to help make this work. And sometimes it was kind of funny because sometimes the two sides wouldn't always recognize what the other one just doesn't know, or the kinds of things they need to be thinking about or make the researcher, the clinician aware of so that they can work well together. So that was an exciting position to help be that liaison and really bridge that gap. A couple of the projects that I was most proud of, again, this was a new position. So when we initially went live with our electronic health record, most of our researchers were considered out of scope. And so no one ever addressed their workflows, their security, or training. And so they were just kind of, I don't know, it was kind of this hodgepodge thing where they just kind of put Band-Aids on it. No, we'll make you look like this person and that person. They went to the same training any nurse would go to, though most of our clinical research coordinators are not nurses. And so it was a mess. And so really just taking a step back and understanding the research world, kind of go through what their workflows are. What should their security be? What should they be documenting in the medical record? And what really should be part of the research chart that's separate? I also led the process. I defined a process rather for orders development for research studies. Came up with basically a basic template to follow and some guidance for both the researchers and the IT side to know what should be built in the system to help, support patient safety, but also fidelity of that protocol when that study gets implemented, because research is carried on throughout the institution, not just on the CRU. And, our clinical colleagues, they don't always recognize that they're often working with non-clinical people who often don't even know what an order is or why a nurse would need one. We also have many of as I said before, most all of our research coordinators are not nurses, but for those that are, they're not employed by our healthcare organization. And so they are still, though, interacting with our patients. They're still, using their nursing skills within their scope of practice to provide care. And so when it became known to some higher ups at the healthcare organization, it was like, wait, how do we know they're competent? So one of the other big projects I had was putting together an onboarding program for them to make sure that, they go through, that we know that they have a current RN license, that they are up on their skills, and just trying to really match what the expectations would be for our clinical nurses and providing that same education and support and onboarding for the research nurses that aren't employed but yet do work here. So that was 8 years of my life, and then I ended up back here on the CRU. And like I said, I've been the manager here now for just under 2 years, supporting the clinical research nurses on the unit, but still trying to maintain a presence at an organizational level to make sure research has a voice and nursing has a voice. Betsy does have Tam and I as part of her clinical trials leadership team, which is new, but it does involve like the research pharmacy. She's creating new positions to really put an infrastructure in place, but it's great that Tam and I can be at the table to be the voice of nursing. Tam and I are also, though it's not well recognized and we need to maybe advertise it a little more, but we are a resource to our nursing colleagues. You know, with research being carried out on all these different units, they are often just not sure what the expectations are, what their role is, what the role of the study team is. And that's where our value as a clinical research nurse often shines, as we can step in and help provide that translation and again, bridge that gap. So it's been an exciting career. It's fun to be in such a unique specialty. It stays fresh, and obviously there's a lot of opportunities with what you can do with your role as a CRN.
Thanks, Tammy. I'm going to try one more time to play Bridget Johnson because I think I've got it.
Hi, my name is Bridget Johnson. I'm a clinical research nurse at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Department of Surgery. I'm the primary coordinator for our vascular surgery studies, as well as the liaison between clinic staff and research staff. I help develop workflows to minimize the impact our studies have on clinical workloads. I also act as a medical record expert and go-to for any documentation or order entry questions. I've been a CRN for a little over 3 years. My background is in intensive care. However, when I moved to Wisconsin in 2018, I was looking for a change. I was feeling a little burnt out from working in the ICU and some of the moral and ethical issues that arise in that setting. I had never really considered research as an option for my career until I came to the University of Wisconsin. Initially, I applied for and was hired into a dual role. So I acted as both a research coordinator and a clinic nurse for our vascular surgery division. In the fall of 2019, the institution decided to move away from the dual role and asked me to choose to go full-time as either a CRN with the Department of Surgery or as a clinic nurse with our vascular surgery clinic. I chose to continue exploring what the CRN role was and how I could develop it for my office. And I have enjoyed doing this for our office in the Department of Surgery over the last couple of years. Nursing is a very rewarding career path as is. However, working as a research nurse, it has been that much more rewarding knowing that we are helping patient populations that have maybe exhausted all other traditional treatment options available to them, or that we're helping innovative, less invasive treatment options get approved for future patients to benefit from, whether that's because it's less invasive or more cost effective. At the end of the day, our patients are hopefully going to benefit in the future. My mom was actually in a research study when she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2015. And it blew my mind at that time that she was able to have her surgery and complete all of her radiation therapy within 7 days as part of the study, and she's been cancer-free ever since. So that was kind of my first introduction to actually being in research and what that could do for patients. The biggest challenge that I face currently is that I am the only clinical research nurse in our office. It was a new position when I started, so there's been very little guidance about how to best utilize my role and how to best develop my role within our office. Sometimes it can feel like I am the only one truly invested in fully developing the role to its fullest potential. The other coordinators are grateful for my insight and my ability to sign their study orders, so they don't have to track down residents or physicians. But I do think that there's more that this role can offer and contribute to our office, and especially to the startup phase for studies. That's difficult for me to explain to everyone else because it's not because of a tangible skill or something that is immediately recognizable to them. I think that nurses have an active role, or having an active role in research is very important. We are naturally advocates. We want what is best for our patients. We want to improve medicine. Quality improvement and policy development has been a consistent factor in every job that I've had. I feel that as a research nurse, I have the opportunity to continue working on quality improvement and policy development, but just on a much larger scale and to impact a much larger pool of patients. I'm extremely glad that I've had the opportunity to jump into being a research nurse. I'm still learning what that means and how to become the best research nurse that I can be. But I'm so grateful for the International Association of Clinical Research Nurses. It's been a huge help for me to have a network of other research nurses that I can learn from and that I can work with to help develop my own skills as a research nurse.
So you can see in the chat that Bridget struck a chord when she talked about articulating, it's the difficulty in articulating what a clinical research nurse does. And yes, I think that that is one of the things that we struggle with every day. And I'm so grateful that I met with Bridget early on in her transition from that dual role to that of clinical research nurse. She had the insight to reach out to me, and along with her non-RN colleagues, to discuss what does this role mean for her in that setting. And you know, kind of the first thing I said was, oh, let's get you hooked up with IACRN. And when she talked about being the only RN or CRN in a group, you do feel siloed. You feel like you're the only one, that it's hard to articulate what your role is. It's hard to say to people, this is where I would be best used, if you don't know what that is. And so Bridget did join IACRN. I'm happy that she joined the conference last year and took away some really great information. And we've, been touching base every now and again, just to kind of help create her role, because in her situation, it's very exciting because she's creating the role, but it's also difficult because there's no path already laid. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. We do have about 15 minutes left. I would love to open this up to, I think I might have been on mute, but anyway, yes, Bridget articulates what we feel a lot, or how to articulate our role, how to share with others, how to best use us as a resource. And I think what we need to do is figure that out ourselves so that we can tell other people our value, that we can show our value. So I do want to open it up to people for comments. I guess I would love to know in this presentation where you are, similarities to how you practice, differences to how you practice. Is there something that resonated with you that we talked about today? Before we do that, I want to thank all CRNs everywhere for all you do today to make tomorrow a brighter place. Sometimes that abstract tomorrow is hard. We need reminding of why we're doing this. And to all my fellow colleagues at UW Health, SMPH, School of Medicine, and even Mary Jane out of retirement, thank you for sharing because I think our stories are extremely valuable, and hearing from each other, it makes me want to cry a little bit, but it also reminds me that this is so important, and doing this with all of you is very important to me.
And Tam, I would like to celebrate MJ for bringing you to this organization, because you have been a powerhouse ever since you started.
Thank you, Diane. That's so nice.
You took the words out of my mouth, Diane.
Oh,
absolutely. You've been brilliant. I was
Thank
just
you.
telling Lucy who you were and what you were doing, and I ran out of space to tell her, list everything. But yeah, you're amazing. And this was a brilliant session. Thank you.
It was so fun to do. And I can't wait to, Diane, hear your presentation, because I know that you have a very similar setting to what we have here at UW, an adult clinical research unit.
I have a question for
yes.
you, madam, before we run out of time, with all thanking and all the amazing. Oh, here's Terry. I know Terry is Terry. So anyway, I have a question, Tam, about your staffing of your overnights. So you staff 24/7, even if you don't have work. How many staff do you have on at night if there isn't a study? And at what point do you change that? And how many participants might you have staying in any one night?
Our staff are extremely flexible, and that is really what has allowed us to do what we do. So they switch around. So if there is a night where we would have a participant, an oncology participant, they will switch around so that 2 of them are on, and then maybe take another night off. And if needed, we will close the unit for, the end of PMs until the next morning. So that's kind of how that works, just the flexibility. Jen, that is a struggle. And I would guess that that's a struggle throughout.
So I guess that what I'm wondering, because I know we have flexible staff, and I think that's something about research nurses are amazing. They just make it work, don't they? But it's more about the other studies that people might be committed to the next day. So how many people, do you only ever have 2 people rostered on at night?
Yes,
on any given
they are
night.
dedicated PM night staff. They don't work the day. Yeah.
Okay, so they're always there. And what is your night shift? Is that midnight?
11 p.m. to 7 a.m.
Okay, so then you also need the evening, don't you?
Yep.
The late and that. Okay.
So what we usually do is we've been scheduling a nurse from a 10 to 6:30, 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. to cover that first half of the PM shift. And then there's one nurse on the PM shift from 6:30 on.
One nurse?
Yes. Yep. And sometimes there's patients and sometimes there's not. And if it's a patient that needs 2 nurses, then we find a nurse.
So you'll have people, I'm so sorry to take up time, but you would have people on at night on their own in the unit with a participant?
If they're a stable participant, yes. Knowing that we have units surrounding us on three sides.
Do too.
Yep. And we
kind
of
supported by the response teams, and the care team leaders on the neighboring units are more than willing to come and help. So we keep their cell phone numbers down, and
we do too.
They're never really alone.
Right.
Having worked the night shift there alone, it really does not feel like you're alone. You have a lot of resources, and they would never put anybody, this is like healthy participants only, or people who are just here for PK draws. Nobody who really needs like medical monitoring for overnight purposes.
Okay, because our risk assessment is that we need to lone worker policy, and we're in the same sort of embedded within a hospital with lots of clinical people around, with the emergency call, all of that. But we would always say we need to, for lone worker, for protection of the staff, as well as should an untoward event happen to a healthy participant or a stable participant, that was a risk we weren't able to take. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
So the staff that you spoke about, maybe I missed it. So who's doing the data management and of course the data control? That's one question. And the other question is, I suppose it's inevitable. You enter your data, the clinical research nurses enter data on an electronic CRF. There's no paper.
No. So we work with study teams. So we are the nursing support for clinical research activities. The study team who's managing each individual study is responsible for entering data collection. We do, however, develop a CRU flow sheet, which it's a paper, we're on paper, and we enter clinical measurements, blood pressure, blood draws, those sorts of things into the medical record. But specifically for the case report form or any data management that's uploaded onto a platform of that happens by the study team. The study team also gets a copy of our flow sheet that has all of the pertinent information that they would need. We work with the study team to develop that. And then that is also scanned into HealthLink. So if this person came in for a clinical issue, that information would be available in the medical record. So the CRU nurses do not recruit participants. We do not consent participants, although we verify ongoing informed consent, making sure that the participant understands what they're here for. And we don't do data management or entry.
Thank you.
Tam, are you on Epic?
We are.
Yeah. Okay.
We just call our instance HealthLink.
Yes. Thanks, Carla. All right.
Jennifer dropped a question in the chat real quick.
She did. So we have at full staff 15 nurses. And a clinical research, we only have nurses on our unit. So it would only be nurses that are here alone at night.
I'm sorry, tell me how many again? I was confused by Emily joining.
15 nurses
15.
when we're.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And most of them, all of them work like a 0.8 or a 0.9, which really helps with flexibility as well. Yeah. Weekends, we get into trouble because our census goes way down, yet we have somebody scheduled. So a lot of times they'll move their shift into the week.
And there are no CRPs, you said, on your
No,
unit.
they're nurses.
Okay.
Do you do mobile visits, Tam?
We do not.
Okay.
We had a mobile research unit for a while that had 2 nurses and 1 coordinator. And there was not enough need for that to support it. I would anticipate in the next couple of years, we'll be looking at something like that in the future. Do you, Diane?
Yes.
Okay. Oh,
yeah, but it's encompassed within the inpatient staff.
Okay.
So I have 11 inpatient nurses, but they're also the same ones who do the mobile visits within the hospital. My clinic staff, which there are currently 2 nurses, there will be a 3rd, they're the ones that go to other buildings on campus. So they may go to the MRI, they may go to the brain imaging center to assist with an MRI to do the contrast. So
we're going to have to talk to you, Tammy. We have to talk to Diane.
They go to other buildings, and my inpatient nurses usually stay within the hospital. They'll go to the oncology floor, they'll go to surgical floors, so they stay within the confines of the hospital.
Okay.
We go everywhere.
Do you?
We go to schools, we go to the university, colleges, people's homes, different departments, adults and peds.
Oh, wow.
Jane Martin is on the call. She's acting matron backfilling me so that I can do my associate director role, my national
Hello.
role. But
Hi.
Jane's the lead children's nurse, actually, the senior sister for pediatrics.
We've even done visits in community halls besides Sainsbury's. So they were quite successful.
You guys do everything.
So
log on to the UK sessions. Jane and her colleagues will be
definitely.
presenting.
It makes us feel very lucky and privileged to have so much infrastructure and support. Yeah.
But you didn't see the amazing facilities that they have in New Zealand and Auckland last night.
Oh wow! I'll have to catch up.
Mind blowing! It was like a luxury hotel. Atriums. Quite amazing. Recessed lighting. Tam, if you want to take your slide down, maybe then we would be able to
I will
see
stop
everybody.
sharing.